Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Sustainable Commodities podcast, a podcast to help people navigate the ever-changing world of sustainability and sustainable commodities. I'm Barnaby Patchett, MD of 199 Agency, a marketing agency working in sustainability. And with me...
Hi, I'm Judith Murdoch from Murdoch Associates, focusing on forestry commodities.
And in this episode, we're delighted to welcome Professor Erik Meijaard to the show. In addition to being a leading conservation scientist and managing director of Borneo Futures, Erik's also the co-chair of the IUCN Oil Palm Task Force. The IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, is now the world's largest and most diverse environmental network and a leading provider of conservation data, assessments and analysis. Today, we're going to talk to Erik about a new report exploring the future of vegetable oils. Erik was the lead author on the report, which explores the implications of oil crops, looking at fats, forests, forecasts and futures.
So to start off with, Erik, thank you for joining us today because we know that you're a really busy person. But could you start by explaining the background to the IUCN and also the background to the team who worked on the report with you?
So the IUCN in 2016 recognized that there was a lot of public concern about palm oil and impacts of palm oil, especially on forests, especially on species like orangutans. But the IUCN, which, as Barnaby just said, is a large organization, a global organization that looks at biodiversity conservation as well as social aspects related to biodiversity conservation. And they decided they just didn't know enough about palm oil. So there was a resolution at the conference that the IUCN organizes every 4 years, the big congress, that called for the establishment of a task force that would specifically start looking into this complex stuff around palm oil and biodiversity. So initially, we were called the Oil Palm Task Force, and later we sort of came to realize that it didn't really make sense to talk about palm oil in isolation of other vegetable oils. So we were renamed the Oil Crops Task Force. So that's who we are at the moment.
Okay, and why did you choose to do a review of the whole oils and fats market, and certainly, as you've already highlighted, not about palm oil or say just soya, which are the kind of the bad guys in all of this, or seem to be?
Yeah, so when we started looking at palm oil and biodiversity in 2018, that's another report we published. One of the major realizations that we had, and I guess it wasn't new as such, but it never really been spoken about as such, is that one of the things that oil palm does do is produce a lot of oil per unit area of land. So then we started to think, well, hold on. So there is a large global demand, and there's a growing global demand for vegetable oils. And I sometimes see things on social media. People say, well, we just could stop consuming oils and fats. And that's a really dumb idea because you die when you do that. So we need oils and fats in our diets, and with more people on the planet, there is a growing demand for these oils and fats. And then it becomes a really important question: how do you produce the oils and fats that we need in a way that creates the least negative impact on people and the planet? That's kind of where we came from, and that means that you can't look at palm oil only. You need to look at all the oils that are being produced, all the oil crops that are used to produce these oils.
Yeah, and I was certainly surprised to see things such as cotton oil up there in terms of volume. Were you surprised to see things like cotton oil up there in volume terms?
I was, yeah. I mean, I frankly, I'd never made the link between cotton and cotton oil. I thought cotton was used for producing clothes, but apparently it's an important byproduct of cotton production. You can also produce oils. But frankly, up until now, I don't really know where it's used. I've never seen a bottle of cotton oil in the supermarket, but maybe I haven't looked carefully enough. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure it has its uses because, as you say, there's a lot of it being produced.
Yeah, I think because obviously in Europe and the UK, we're kind of hyper-focused on crops like palm oil and soya. And just as you have done in this report, do we need to be taking a more holistic view?
The conclusion that we came to, looking at all these oils at the same time, that really there are no such thing as bad oil crops. And that's what I'd like to get into people's minds. There is this image of an evil crop called oil palm that produces evil oils that you want to stay away from. And there's plenty of bad palm oil, but there's also plenty of bad peanut oil and plenty of bad sunflower oil and plenty of bad soy oil, etc., etc., etc. And it's not about the oils and it's not about the crops, but it really is about the practices. And that's what we want to focus on. Improve the practices, how these oils are produced for any oils, irrespective of the crop.
So in terms of that, in terms of good and bad practices, what are the standout environmental pressures caused by oils and fats as we stand today?
Well, I guess the obvious one is deforestation, or deforestation, maybe more broadly, conversion of natural ecosystems to agricultural land. That it is well known that at the global scale, the biggest threat to biodiversity come from agriculture. So you convert a tropical rainforest or a boreal pine forest or a grassland savanna in the United States to agriculture, you'll end up with less biodiversity. So avoiding conversion of any natural ecosystem for the production of oil crops would be, for me, number one from an environmental perspective. But then we had some real shocking finds as well, looking at the incredible use of agrochemicals in the production of soy. I can't quite remember, but I think in the report it says that the Brazilian on average consumes 7.5 liters of agrochemicals per year coming from these systems. I'll need to check the report, but I'm pretty sure that's what the quote was. So there's a lot of these additional impacts on water, freshwater systems, agrochemicals, and of course biodiversity. And then we also looked at the social side. So biodiversity is one side. Then there's the whole social side of production, labor issues. Did anyone steal someone's land to produce these crops? Like these kind of obvious things that you know are not good practice. And again, we find these bad practices across all the oil crops. And we also find good examples of all these practices across all the same oil crops.
Yeah. And one of the things within the report, you do talk about smallholders. How significant do you think smallholders are in the oils and fats industry?
I think it varies per crop. So palm oil is generally said that about 40% of the palm oil that is produced is grown by smallholders. I've done quite a bit of work on coconuts. Coconut is primarily a smallholder crop, so there's a lot of coconut. Coconut is everywhere throughout the tropics. In fact, we published a paper last year that suggested there might be more coconut than there is oil palm. But it's all in very small patches. Every tropical village will have a couple of coconut palms or a small 1 hectare plantation. So soybean is a large holder crop, very large areas of land allocated. Similar maize, rapeseed. I think sunflower has some of the largest holdings in terms of the areas allocated, the field sizes of sunflower grown. So it varies per crop.
And do you think smallholders are getting left behind with, we're going to come on and talk about legislation, but do you think they're getting left behind as industry focuses on legislation?
Well, I know it's been brought up a lot in relation to the EUDR, deforestation regulation, where the narrative is that because it's a difficult system to comply with, companies are much more likely to comply with it than smallholders, and hence smallholders are left behind. On the other hand, certainly within palm oil, having seen the industry develop over the past 20 years, I've seen increasing engagement of smallholders, increased certification of smallholders. Talking to an average farmer in places where I work in Indonesia and Borneo, they like palm oil because it generates good income for them.
Yeah, definitely. And moving on perhaps to just look at where palm oil and other oils are used, focusing on biofuel, which is a major driver for the production of something like palm oil. How big an issue do you think it is as Europe looks to remove palm oil from its biofuel feedstock? How do you think the rest of the world will move with biodiesels?
I frankly don't have much of an idea. I know that Indonesia being the largest palm oil producer in the world at the country level, has major, very ambitious biofuel plans. So I think Indonesia will probably try to grow a lot of its palm oil for its own biofuel use. How this works out globally, I don't have a good feel for that. I think about 18% of all the vegetable oils that are used in the world are used for biofuel. So the majority is still on consumer products and food products.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be changing, I guess, as different governments around the world kind of mandate increases in biofuels. Do you see that potentially we're going to come up against the inevitable sort of food versus fuel debate?
Yeah, it's a good question. That might come up. I mean, I see a lot of the discussion around that biofuel displaces agricultural land use for food production. The evidence isn't always that strong, so I'm not entirely sure where I stand on that. I mean, I think broadly thinking, I don't think biofuel as an idea is such a bad idea. If you could grow fuel rather than pulling it out of the ground as fossil fuels, in theory, that sounds good. The reality is that it isn't as clear cut as people make it out to be. So, but I'm certainly not a biofuel specialist, so I can't really tell which way this is heading. And to what extent this is going to compete with food. What we do know is that there is incredible pressure on agricultural land to produce more food, and that touches on the big debate, like whether you want to intensify food production or agricultural production in general, and produce as much as possible on as little land as possible, and therefore spare land for other purposes, like conserving orangutans or other endangered wildlife. Or do you try to spread it all out a little bit and go into sort of mixed systems, agroforestry, and where you try to achieve both objectives on the same piece of land? Again, the science isn't that clear in it. I think if you just look at it from a biodiversity perspective, you do want to spare your land as much as possible, so produce as much as you can on as little land as you need. But you bring in the social component, suddenly you have a lot of these smallholders that you're just referring to. These are also people that need a source of income. So, you can't just kick them aside and say this land is now for conservation. So it gets increasingly complex with, it's often so much easier to be myopic about these issues and say, I don't like this and I do like that. And that's how I lead my life. But I'm totally fine with that. I would say with people who tell me they don't want to use palm oil, I'm totally okay. I mean, the only thing I'm asking you, if you're saying no to palm oil because you need oils and fat in your diet, you'll be saying yes to something else. And I just want you to think what that yes means. And quite often people just have no idea. I mean, where do your peanuts come from? People wouldn't be able to name the 6 biggest producers, and if they did, they'd probably find out. So, oh, that's surprising. Sesame is another good example. I knew nothing about it. Started reading about sesame. The biggest sesame producer in the world, according to the FAO, is Sudan, where much of the trade and production of sesame is in the hand of warlords. I have never read anything about human rights issues in Sudan related to sesame production, but we're happily sprinkling that sesame on our foods. And actually, sesame is in a lot of our products. When we're doing the supermarket work, actually, there was more products that contain sesame than palm oil. So I think there's just so much we don't know, and some of it I think is kept from us, and this is something we emphasize. Certainly, as consumers, we have a right to a lot more transparency and clarity about what is in the food and what is in the products that we buy, and often that product that information isn't available. You can buy a pot of peanut butter that says contains no palm oil, and you turn the pot around and you try to find out where the peanuts come from, and it doesn't mention it, let alone how those peanuts were produced, whether there was any deforestation related to that, was the work done by children, like 10-year-old children. All these sort of things are not available to the consumer. So you feel good about buying that pot of contains no palm oil peanut butter, but really you don't know what you're doing. And I think that is problematic.
Yeah, I think we've seen that in palm oil in terms of the PR problem that palm has. I guess, what are the solutions? How do we solve this?
Well, I think more transparency is possible. I mean, I really, for a start, I always say I wouldn't say to anyone what I think they should do. I think everyone has their own set of values. You decide. If orangutan conservation is the most important thing in your life and you don't care about anything else, you probably want to stay away from palm oil. If you have a broader set of values, you probably want to think more broadly. Maybe you do care about sesame producers in Sudan and start rethinking that. The thing is, we need that information. The technologies are there, and I wouldn't say for every problem there is a technological solution, but it could certainly help. I mean, you know where things are produced. The EUDR is asking for this. I mean, where does your palm oil come from? Where does your beef come from? Where does your whatever come from? I don't think the list in a way is complete enough, because some of probably the big drivers of deforestation are not even on that list, but that's a different discussion. The key thing is that a lot of these products can be traceable, and why are you not able to have a QR code or whatever on a product and with your app where this says, I'm Erik, I like this and I don't like that, and I pointed at the product and it says, Erik, stay away from it or buy it. I mean, it can't be that difficult, but I think there are vested interests within the industry and the politics around the industry that want to prevent that information flow. I really think there is a block on transparency, and hence we bring out these reports and try to talk about it and get people to rethink their real beliefs about these things.
You had a really interesting section, I think, in this report, which is what we do not but should know. It's right at the end. And I think obviously you've mentioned transparency, but could you go into more about that? What don't we know but should?
Well, unfortunately, a lot. There's so much. I mentioned the sesame example. I just came across it because I was working on a paper and I needed some information. I think there's lots of these surprises. I mean, all the co-authors on this report, and I haven't counted, but I think there's about 25, are all experienced researchers with backgrounds in human rights and in biodiversity management and in forest management and crop development and so on and so on and so on. And every single one has gone through the study and go, I had no idea. So there is so much, and so much that we don't know and didn't know, and it took a lot of digging to find out that information. So I think the list is long, and sometimes I think one of the problems is that we focus too much on what we think we know, and by overlooking what we don't know, we think we've come to the right conclusion, but you're actually missing the picture. And again, it does take quite a lot of work. I mean, if you would want to go into a supermarket and study every background of every product, I mean, you never get your shopping done. But that's also the role of people like yourself and myself to make that information available and make sure that people take it in.
How important do you believe that the EUDR is for the future of oils and fats, and specifically looking at that traceability factor that you've mentioned?
It's gonna have an impact. I mean, obviously, for the two oil crops, if I'm not mistaken, palm oil and soybean, that are on the current list of the EUDR, it's going to require that it's very clear where the products come from, and especially if there was any deforestation after the cutoff date of, correct me if I'm wrong, December 2020, is that right? Yeah. So there's going to be a lot more scrutiny on these crops. What I don't know is to what extent that's going to lead to leakage. Maybe Indonesia, Malaysia say, okay, well, forget about Europe. We'll just sell more to China or sell more to India and Pakistan, which currently are much bigger buyers of palm oil from these countries than the EU. And what is that going to mean? Because the EU, through its engagement with countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, also has had a major impact in improvement of practices. So I think one of the advantages of working in palm oil is that it's been so publicly scrutinized and the media are on to it all the time, that it's also probably one of the commodities with the biggest improvement in management, as far as I'm aware. I mean, I've only ever I've consulted with one palm oil company for 13 years now, primarily on their biodiversity management. And I'm really, really proud of the work that they're doing there. And they're certainly not your average palm oil company. They're an excellent company. But I see these standards being driven, and because that pressure for changing these standards primarily comes from Australian, North American, European consumers. If you lose that, you also lose that seat on the table to push these pressures. Now, I have some concerns that we'll lose the dialogue. I mean, there's a lot of political posturing at the moment. Indonesia, Malaysia being upset about the regulations, EU pushing back and saying, well, this is what it's going to be. So it's a bit hard to predict, but I think you need to be a little bit careful. Good regulations are good. If this stops deforestation in relation to soybean and palm oil production that is important into the EU, I think that's a good thing in general.
Have you seen any modelling on how much they think it will reduce deforestation?
Not that I can remember. I mean, one of the things is, of course, it happens at a time when palm oil-driven deforestation, certainly in Indonesia, also in Malaysia, it's really at a historic low, going back 40, 50 years. It peaked around 2010, 2015, and ever since it's been really low. Of course, no one quite know why that is. Is that because of better governments? Is that because the palm oil prices have been relatively low? There's lots of thinking there, but the fact is that palm oil-driven deforestation in Indonesia and Malaysia has been at a very low level in recent years. So what the EUDR then is going to avoid is a good question. So I'm not entirely sure.
No, I think everyone we've spoken to, not a single person has seen any modelling on it, which is the kind of, is it more ideological? I guess it sets a good precedent, but is it more ideological than practical?
Yeah, I also wonder whether there's significant vested interest. I talked about the supermarket survey that we're doing. I mean, the most commonly used oils in Europe, in the Netherlands supermarket, are rapeseed and sunflower, which of course are oils locally grown. So there might also be some producers in the EU that are quite happy with keeping palm oil and soybean out. And is that a good thing or a bad thing? I look at it from a global perspective. I look at it at the perspective of growing demand for oils and fats that need to be met somehow, somewhere. And I like that to be done with the minimum negative social and environmental impact possible. And as far as I'm concerned, without the involvement of oil palm, you're going to have a real problem. You're going to need a lot more land to produce that same amount of oil. So for me, oil palm needs to be in there together with other crops, but it needs to be oil palm that is really well managed. That means no deforestation. That means adhering to all the human rights issues that we've looked at, and so on. So again, it's back to the good practices.
Yeah, I think climate change, again, in the report you mentioned that. How significant do you think climate change will be on all of the crops?
Quite significant, I think. Even I know it's from Indonesia, where areas that were planted in the 1990s, they just don't get enough rain anymore. So part of East Kalimantan, oil palm is a very thirsty crop, and it needs kind of water all year round. So if you start losing that, and we've done climate modeling on Borneo over the past, if I remember correctly, 30 or 40 years, Borneo has lost about 800 mils of annual rainfall. So that's significant. And it's going to shift a lot of these crops around. In our report, we refer to, because of global warming, you're also pushing up the zone in which you can grow oil crops in the northern areas, into Canada and Russia, where there might well be agricultural-driven deforestation happening as we speak. I mean, I never quite know how that works. I think Canada is the country in the world with the biggest forest loss, but somehow it's not named forest loss. I think it's about 45 million hectares or so.
Yeah.
But the official statistics are, because it's fire-induced forest loss, and therefore it's not forest loss. But then again, I remember the big fires in Indonesia, and that certainly was fire-induced forest loss that was called deforestation. So are we talking? I'm not quite sure how it all works. But anyway, I worry seeing an expansion of oil crops into boreal forest areas that are replacing forests that are also important for biodiversity and retaining carbon in trees. So there's this strong focus on what's happening in the tropics, but I think we always need to look at our own areas as well. Coming from the Netherlands, which is the second largest agricultural producers in the world, which is an amazing statistic for such a small country. But it just shows you what we do. We import products and nutrients into our country, and then we export them again and leave behind a highly over fertile mess, really. So I think it's always easy to point at other countries and say, you're doing this wrong, doing that wrong. But I think at the same time, we also need to look at ourselves and our own agricultural lands and the own mess we've made of our own biodiversity management, and still do. So
going back to some solutions, how important are new technologies in producing oils and fats, or even in finding alternatives to them?
Yeah, we looked at, there's been a lot of hype around algae oil and all sorts of single cell organisms that produce oils, and a lot of hype in the media, a lot of investments going into it, but nothing has really come to life. Nothing's really been taken to scale. And one of my biggest questions, which I don't really think I have an answer to, is that these organisms need a feedstock as well. They quite often are fed on sugars, so you need sugar cane or sugar beets, and again, you need something to go into this organism. The oil it's not just pulled out of the air. I mean, you need the carbon that goes in the oil from some source. So, I'm a little unclear about it. What we said in our report is that a potentially very important development, but it's not going to help us in the next 1 or 2 decades. So we need to deal with the problems that are right in front of us now and find solutions whilst maintaining these technological opportunities as they roll out. And there are various improvements. There are so many improvements in management that I've seen come in. Simple standard things like composting, methane capture from palm oil effluent ponds, better harvesting. I've heard statistics that like 30% of the oil palm in Malaysia is not harvested because they can't find the workers. It's very labor intensive. Automated harvesting, is that possible? Yield optimization, soil management, probably one of the most important things that we don't really talk about, but soil is the bank on which the entire agricultural industry depends. And if your soil's gone, that's it. That's the end of it. So maintaining soil health and again, technologies play a big role. But I also like dump technology. We've done a lot of work on citizen science-based biodiversity monitoring in oil palm, and it's probably one of the more exciting things I've been doing in the past few years. Really, I'm an ecologist. I love data, really good data, but also really good buy-in from workers. And this is what I always said, for management, I need people to care about management. It's not something that's from the CEO, some directive, some piece of paper. I need people on the ground to understand why we're doing this, why it is important to protect the orangutan. And this is something we see with the citizen science, where, of course, you have thousands of workers in an average oil pump concession. Get them involved, and we've had some real successes there. And I find that also exciting. That's not technology, but that's just psychology, some social processes that are, to me, as important.
Yeah, I think everybody working together, as you say, is just so important. So, what do you see for the future then? What's your next big adventure?
I'm playing with money at the moment. I want to see a lot more money going into conservation, and there's a lot of hype and speculation. Bio credits, biodiversity credits, rhino bonds, you name it. Mm-hmm. But I want to make sure that any of that money is translated into actual positive wildlife outcomes. And I think that's where a lot of initiatives seem to fail. I've seen this a little bit in the carbon discussions, where there's lots of players in the middle and the facilitating processes. But what's really happening down on the ground? What's really the additionality that you're offering through these processes? So this is something we're working on with the palm oil industry, but also I work with indigenous communities on Borneo, trying to do similar, get more money into conservation, get people involved in management and in monitoring, but also get them rewarded for that. So if you ask communities to leave their forest and protect the orangutans and protect the bears and gibbons, they're going to say, well, what's in there for us? And that's a fair question. People want to live as well. And I often get annoyed with these narratives of the wonderful native indigenous people that live in balance with nature. I work with these people, and that's not what they tell me. I mean, they ask for day-to-day things. They want their kids to go to school. They want to have access to a decent road. They want to go to a hospital when that's needed. And they ask them for normal things like every normal person would do. So we need to give them honest answers back. And I think in general, conservation has not been particularly honest and good at that. We very much relied on philanthropy and holding up our hands, give us a little bit of money for orangutan conservation and so on. But we know it's not done enough. So I think I'm looking at new things. So that goes way beyond work on oils and fats. But I think it's all part of that same narrative. We just need better solutions. I mean, we know the world's in a mess from a climate and a biodiversity perspective. So we just, if we want it or not, we just need better solutions. The old ways are just not good enough.
That's really interesting. I think balancing the needs of people and planet is something it's almost quite unfashionable in some sustainability circles. They talk a good game, but actually the solutions that are proffered are often aimed at making poverty sustainable rather than, and that's not what people, it's not fair, it's not equitable, and it's not practical.
Yeah, it's practical for some, but it's not very helpful for the people on the ground. So, yeah, no, it's tricky. It's tricky, but I think we just need to be smarter and think this really true. And yeah, I mean, going back to the oils and fats, we just need to address this. We know there's going to be greater demand, and people say, well, just reduce it. No, you're not going to reduce it. It's going to grow, and you need to address these issues right now. And the politicians that ultimately decide how that's done need to be behind it. So I hope they listen today.
Thank you. Where can people go to find out more about your work?
They can look at our website, Borneo Futures. They can go to the IUCN Oil Crops Task Force website. There is a link to the report there. I don't know whether you can provide the link. That would be very nice, so people can download it directly, or a QR code to it. That would be really good.
We'll put that in the show notes. Absolutely.
That's really great. I mean, one thing it's a 190-page report, and we know very well that no one is going to read that report. So we just focused on making it look really nice. We had a really good Indonesian infographics designer, and the report is, if you just flick through it and look at pictures and look at maps, it tells you a big story already. So I'm not asking for days of your time, but please do download the report, have a look at the pictures, and if there's something that sort of captures your thinking, have a little bit of a look like at the text around it.
And you've put the key takeaways at the very top, so they only need to get to about page 10.
Exactly, and then I hope they want to know more, so they'll keep reading.
Yeah,
no, that's true. Yeah,
I think that's probably a really nice place to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you everyone for listening to the Sustainable Commodities podcast.
Thank you for having me.